Hey YouTube. Hopefully y'all can hear me. I am the one and only Kashmere Majesty. I also go by Red Riding Hood. Y'all already know who I am. I'm back again with another live video, and I'm trying to finish this book so I could go on to another book. And one of the books that I'm trying to finish is Rest in Power, The Enduring Life of Trayvon Martin by Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin. And so far, I done read majority of the book, so I believe I got like two children left. I said two children. I'm in two chapters. Yeah, I got two chapters left. I think. So I'm gonna try my best to get through these because y'all know these chapters be a lot of damn pages. I'm gonna try my best. There's only 13 chapters in this book, and I'm actually well anyway. I knew the justice system wasn't colorblind. Anyway, this is chapter 12, Tracy, June 28, 2013 to July 10th, 2013. I knew the justice system wasn't colorblind. There is one set of rules for us and a different set for other groups. Different races, ethnicities, religions, ethnic groups. The rules for us, for African Americans, had been in place for a long time in this country, and the rules were not going to help us. So, from the beginning, I was worried about the jurors that had been selected for the trial. Could they see the tragedy through the eyes of black parents? I got my answer when I heard the potential white woman juror say Trayvon wouldn't have been suspended had his father been involved in his life. She didn't know me from a can of paint, but she assumed that I wasn't involved in my child's life. My heart sank a little when I heard that. We have a long way to go. Little did she know that I was always a part of my son's life. By June 20th, 2013, the fifth day of the trial, most people in Sanford in the outlying areas knew who we were. We knew that some people in the Sanford area and beyond didn't like us, but we didn't care. We also met many people who support us, from the desk clerks at our hotel in Lake Mary to the McDonald's on the road to the courthouse where we would stop every morning for breakfast. People knew our names and why we were there. Good luck, many of them would say, because most of them were people like us, hardworking, family oriented, struggling to get through the day. At the McDonald's, we would pick up our breakfast from the drive-thru. Some days we would have three cars or vans of lawyers and family going through. Six egg and cheese McMuffins, we would say, coffee, orange juice, hash browns. Shit, I wish I had that right now. That sounds good. And the McDonald's is right down the damn street. Good luck, Tracy, the clerk would say while giving us our food. Good luck, Sabrina. Then we would drive to the courthouse in Sanford. By the time the trial had gotten underway, we had become a little paranoid, and not only from threats on our lives and the lives of our families that we were routinely receiving online, by phone and in the mail. We also thought we were possibly being followed. bringing thousands of protesters into a town with a population of 50,000 does change things. Our case created a mood that the local citizens weren't used to, especially when national civil rights leaders began streaming into town. Again, I wouldn't say that the overall community was against us, but we definitely were foreigners in a foreign place. Our attorney, our attorney Daryl Parks would drive us, taking a different road from the hotel to the courthouse every day. The sheriff's department deputy would meet us in his squad car a mile from the courthouse. He was a nice guy, big and burly, and we would follow his car closely as he led us into town, driving behind the deputy, snaking down side streets, invading this steadily growing mass of media. Parks would drop us off at the back entrance of the courthouse every morning before 8. Once we were dropped off, our attorneys would park in our spaces in front of the courthouse. Then our attorneys would usually address the media, every representative in every network and news outlet, trying to somehow get a new way to talk about the case they had covered so much already. Once the trial began, our attorneys had started doing interviews for us. We were getting too many requests to deal with. We were under such a constant media siege that we soon began staying inside the courthouse throughout the entire day. Passing through the media detector, we would remove our shoes, belts, and any metal objects, and then proceed to the hallway beside the elevator to wait for a sheriff personnel who would bring us through a hallway and into the courtroom. We had to face the killer and his family every day in court. We had to walk through the same doors as they did and down the same hallway, and of course, we had to sit in the courtroom very close to where they sat. We all had security badges. They gave the killer and his family the same thing, the same badges, the same parking space, the same number of seats in the courtroom. Where does it say that the defendant in the murder case gets the same rights as the victim? I'm not sure about the answer to that question. And I'm sure there are good reasons to be fair, but I just had a strong feeling that if the defendant was black and the victim was a white child, it might have gone a different way. The prosecutors rarely came to a small witness room that we'd been given for lunch and breaks and never asked us for input. They met us they met with us prior to the trial, but the strategy was all theirs, for better or for worse. Trial day number 5 would bring the testimony of the important observer to the actual event. Witness number 6, the 911 caller, Jonathan Good. He worked in finance. He would tell the court and was a resident at the retreat at the Twin Lakes on the night Trayvon killing. He was one of the very few eyewitnesses who claimed to have actually seen the struggle between Trayvon and his killer, if for only a few seconds. Let's see what he got to say. He entered the courtroom, a young man in a white dress suit and candy striped necktie. He sat down and under questions from De La Rianda, he told his story. He said he was at home with his wife in the living room watching TV when he heard a faint noise coming from an area near the back of his house. Followed a few minutes later by more noise. The same noise, Good said, just louder, seemed like it was getting closer. He said halfway out his sliding glass door, keeping one foot inside. It looked like a tussle. He said, and he thought it might be an attack involving the dog. What's going on? He yelled into the darkness. Stop it. Then he testified he began to make out the shapes of two people on the ground, one on top of the other. He couldn't see their faces, only the color of their clothing. The color of clothing on top. Dina Ronda said, "What could you see?" "It was dark," said Good, which would lead the jury to believe it was Trayvon in a dark gray hoodie on top. "How about the color of the clothing on the bottom?" "I believe it was light white or red," he said, which was the color of the jacket the killer was wearing that night. Although he only saw 10 seconds max, he also claimed the person on the bottom was lighter skinned. He said that the struggle moved up to the concrete. The person on top was straddling the other who was face up below him. Good said it looked like there was strikes being thrown or punches being thrown, but because of the lack of lightning, he was aware of what he saw. What he saw were punches or the person on top holding the other down. What he was sure of was that he saw the arms of a person on the moving downward, on top moving downward. If it was a fight, however, it must have been a short one. Rachel's call with Trey got dropped at 11. At 7:15. The screams on the 911 call came a minute later. He heard someone yell help, but couldn't say 100% whether it was the man on the top of or the man on the bottom. He called 911. The prosecution played Good's 911 call for the court. "Police, I just heard a shot right behind my house," he said on the call. "They're wrestling right in the back of my porch. The guy's yelling help, but I'm not going outside. I'm pretty sure the guy's dead out there. Holy shit." The God Good had compared the straddling position of the person on top to a move made in mixed martial arts, saying it just looked like something I've seen on TV before. "Did you ever see the person on top pick up the person from the bottom and actually slam them on the concrete?" "No," he said. "Did you ever see the person on top slam the person on the bottom's head to the concrete over and over and over?" "No," he repeated. "Did you see at any time the person on top grabbed the person on the bottom head and actually slam it to the concrete?" "No," he said again. "Of course not. As this was a claim made by the killer, which we believe never happened." So much for the defense opening statement about the concrete being used as a weapon, I thought. After showing exhibits of the crime scene, De La Rianda asked Good when he heard the gunshot in relation to making the 911 call. Good said that after stepping outside and hearing one or two cries for help, he returned inside to pick up his phone. As he was waiting for the dispatcher to pick up, he heard the gunshot. What De La Rianda said next after about 40 minutes of questioning stunned us. "Thank you. I have no further questions at this time." This was a witness saying that Trayvon was on top of the killer attacking him. And the prosecution didn't question how he could be so sure about the color of the people's clothing on that dark and rainy night. I was beginning to feel like the prosecution was overconfident that the jury would connect the few clues they gave them, but I didn't think they'd given them nearly enough to convict. They were making it harder to convict than it needed to be. That evening deepened when O'Mara then began his cross-examination. Good admitted to O'Mara that he was reluctant to get involved in the case, and he had requested to remain anonymous. And he had remained anonymous to everyone except the police, prosecutors, and defense attorneys until now. With one exception, he had spoken to the media. What you saw was the person on top in the MMA style straddle position, correct? O'Mara said, correct, said good. That was further described, was it not, in being a ground and pound? Correct, answer good. What is ground and pound as you define it? The person on top being able to punch the person on bottom, but the person on bottom also has a chance to get out or punch the person on top. It's back and forth, said good. This was this what he saw, or was he merely describing what ground and pound is? Um, the person who now know, the person who you now know to be Trayvon Martin was on top, correct? Correct, said good. And he was the one who was raining blows down on the person on the bottom. George Zimmer, right? O'Mara continued. That's what it looked like. Good said. You couldn't actually see the fist hit face, right? No, he replied. In the discussion of where he was and what he saw continued. Do you think that it was the person on the bottom who was screaming for help? O'Mara said, I mean, rationally thinking, I would think so. Good said, rationally thinking, would it be more rational to think the unarmed person or the wrong end on the wrong end of the gun would be the one screaming, regardless of who was on top and who was on the bottom? Bernie De La ran to question him and redirect, using a pair of whereabouts to represent the two men. He demonstrated the body positions of the killer and Trayvon as Good described them. He asked Good to reiterate what he didn't hear. I mean, that he didn't hear any sounds that would be made by punches or slaps. And Good admitted that he used the term ground and pound simply to give a better description of what he saw. But what he saw was only a downward movement of arms, and he couldn't say there was actual blows inflicted on a person on the ground. But De La Rionda stopped there and never brought up the important point. If Trayvon was beating a shooter so badly, straddling him in the ground and pound position with blows to the head, and so fierce, it would lead the bigger, older man to become disoriented and begin screaming for his life. How could he suddenly see Trayvon reaching for his gun and then be able to retrieve his gun and fire? And if the killer was on his back, as Good claimed, how could Trayvon even have seen the gun holstered behind him as he lay on the ground, let alone been able to reach for it? Things just didn't add up. It could not have possibly happened the way the killer told the story. The prosecutor told us they were going to question Good about that, but the questions were never asked. De La Rionda returned to the prosecution table without attempting to address these issues. Not once did the line of question come to the trial. Why, along with this, why didn't they try to humanize Trayvon? Uh, as attorney Lisa Bloom was right to show him as we knew him. I didn't understand what was going on. After Good testimony, we left the courthouse and headed back to our hotel where the television was filled with news and commentary about our case. If he was raining blows, MMA style, you think there would be some physical evidence of that on his fist? Reverend Sharpton said on one of the never-ending news shows. Second, it was testified that Zimmerman had MMA training. If Zimmerman had MMA training and there was an MMA attack going on, why didn't he use his MMA training to defend himself? It was a Friday night after a long day in a long first week in court. Every weekday night after a day of court, we would have dinner for our attorneys and family. If it was a Friday, we would drive back to Miami. We spent a lot of time alone on the trial, which was something I was accustomed to doing. As a truck driver, I spent my days mostly alone, a one man band, driving between restaurants, hotels, making deliveries. Sometimes my girlfriend Brandy would come up to support me during the trial. Usually, members of my family were there, but most evenings I had nothing to accom- occupy me but the case. I would find myself alone and praying. Continue to show us favor, Lord. I was pray. Continue to cover us. Yeah, this is a lot to read. A whole bunch of damn pages for these long ass chapters. But I'm trying my best to get through it. I'm trying my best to get through it and get over with this book. Because this is a long book. I pray for Trayvon, for Sabrina, for Gerardus, for myself, but I also pray for justice. It was still early, but I already had a feeling that it wasn't going our way. It just seemed so bizarre. A phase kept coming to me. My son had been intensely alive. My son had been alive for us, a teenager who had hopes and dreams and so much love, but in death he became a figure we could only see through the dark mirror of evidence and testimony. A cursed single night when our son and all the life inside him was reduced to a stranger. A black kid in a hoodie, a young man in the shadows, a suspect. The prosecution had yet personalized Trayvon for the jury and had allowed the defense to characterize him in a way that I didn't recognize. If the defense was going to put Trayvon on trial, couldn't the prosecution call Trayvon's grandmother, aunts, uncles, classmates? All I had heard about Trayvon in his trial was what the defense was saying about him. If I was feeling that way, I'm sure the jury was too. I knew these six women didn't and couldn't feel close to Trayvon. Not that the prosecution didn't use nice adjectives when talking about him, but I didn't think they were asking the right questions of the witnesses, or even calling the right kind of witnesses, the kind that will help build a fuller picture of him. So while the killer sat in the court day after day in his suit and tie and blank expression, the victim was absent, unaccounted for, and yet somehow put on trial. I would approach prosecutors De La Rianda and Guy about my concerns. Where are the character witnesses for Trayvon? I would ask. Why would Trayvon approach a man he didn't know? All I would get from them was, "We'll see." The prosecution seemed content with a passive approach, but I didn't feel they were proving the truth beyond a reasonable doubt. But George Zimmerman killed my son, and I was worried we were losing the momentum we had built all of. we had built over all the time we spent on the road in match our march to justice over the past year in 4 months. I still keep faith in the jury. I was comfortable with 6 women, but I was concerned that there were no people of color on the jury except for one Hispanic woman who would later tell author Lisa Bloom that the others trivialized and mocked her. They were technically sequestered at the Marriott in Lake Mary, but they were seen in public. And there were even reports that they'd been boiling and that they were that they were bowling and on other what excursions. I don't know. They went bowling and on other excursions. I'm sorry. This is a lie. But I continue to pray that even though none of them were black, they would have the compassion and insight to realize that race shouldn't be the divisive issue in this case. We believe now and then that the death of a child is the same for white parents as it is for Latino parents, as it is for Asian parents, as it is for black parents, and that our case, as Sabrina has said, was not about black and white, but right and wrong. As long as the women on the jury could understand that, I believe we still had a chance. But I think our hopes might have been misplaced. Race was an issue, babbling under the surface of everything. After one of our best chances for justice appeared on Monday, July 1st, when D. La Rianda called Chris Sereno, the lead detective in the shooting of my son, to stand. I said after, I meant another. I'm sorry. The square jawed detective wore a black suit, black tie, and dark, closely cut hair. Sereno led the investigation for the Sanford police. Oh my God, this is a lot to read. Department from its first night to meeting with me on 2 mornings after shooting, all the way up to consulting with Chief Bill Lee and even members of the state's attorney office. A career police officer, Sereno had nearly 20 years of experience in law enforcement, including time as a federal officer with the Department of Defense. I knew he would tell the truth and help our case, as if he was asked the right questions. He shrugged his broad shoulders as he settled into the chair and introduced himself in the kind of gruff, gravelly voice you might expect from a career cop. He gave some details about the night of February 26, 2012, when he arrived at the retreat at approximately 8 p.m. Trayvon was dead on the ground, and the killer had already been taken to custody by the police department. He said he tried to identify Trayvon through a fingerprint scan, but he wasn't in the system. Around midnight, Sereno headed back to the police station where he met the killer for the first time. Another investigator, Officer Doris Singleton, had already interviewed him, but Sereno decided to interview him again. I'm about to get some water. I'll be back. It's fucking hot. Back up. All right, y'all, I'm back. I had to get some water because my water that I did have it got hot. I'm surprised I ain't got nothing to do today. No, no doctor appointments. No reason to walk to the DHS building. Nothing. Everything is handled until further notice. So I don't really don't have anything to do. Dion Rihanna played a portion of Sereno's interview tape for the court, leading up to the killer's claim that Trayvon mounted him and began punching him in the face and the head. When Trayvon began pounding his head against the concrete, the killer said he started yelling for help, but Trayvon smeared his mouth and nose. The killer tried to slide out from underneath Trayvon, but realized his short had come up and felt Trayvon reaching towards his right side where the gun was holstered. It would turn out behind his back, which the prosecution had failed to raise this point at trial, wrote the attorney and author Lisa Bloom in her book about the case. You're going to die, motherfucker. We could hear Zimmerman saying on the interview tape, quoting what he said Trayvon had told him. But the killer, in his version of the story, was quicker and grabbed the gun first. What happened then? Sereno asked. I shot him, the killer said. Trayvon immediately set up. Trayvon immediately set up after the shot and went through him. You got me, the killer said. Trayvon told him before dying. He said somehow I got out from under. Trayvon, as he died, he thought Trayvon was armed with something in his hands, so he spread my son's arms apart and climbed on top of him until Sereno asked the police arrived and you surrendered, to which the killer agreed. I feel like it's a lot of truths and lies mixed in these stories. Some parts are true and some of it are lies. Majority of it is lies, though. Ooh, excuse me. What is this? I found it. Now that's a bomb. It was pretty much an extent of Sereno's first interview, and for the most part, Sereno took him at his word. They scheduled a time to meet the next day for a walkthrough of the events at the retreat, and Sereno instructed the killer to go home and get some rest. Go home and get some rest. I heard this story a dozen times now, but it was always like a punch to my stomach. Dingla Rihanna then played the video of the walkthrough at the retreat, but now Sabrina couldn't bear to look at the video screen hanging on a courtroom's wall. They had shown Trayvon's lifeless body too many times on it, and she couldn't stand to see it again. She left the courtroom before the lights were dim, and the video screen showed George Zimmerman on the day after the killing. In the video, he took Sereno and two other investigators through his version of the events. He showed them where he was when he first saw Trayvon. He showed them where he was parked and where my son died. He gave his version of what happened, saying that Trayvon confronted, then attacked him. Dina Rianda had one more video to show the jury, the one from a few days after the shooting. In this video, Sereno interviewed the killer in the interrogation room at the Sanford police station. Officer Doris Singleton joined Sereno, and the three of them sat around a table in a small room with a two-way mirror on one wall. The killer repeated his version of the events from that night, but this time Sereno and Singleton had some tougher questions for him. They drilled him about why he didn't identify himself as Neighborhood Watch, as well as the details of their final encounter. I can't pinpoint where you were smothered. That's the problem I'm having. Sereno said once they moved to his desk to play the 911 tape. And when we're listening to the screaming, it doesn't sound like there is a hesitation in the screaming, said Officer Singleton. It sounds like it's continuous, and if someone's being hurt, imitates screaming being muffled, it's going to stop. But we don't hear it stop. Again, thoughts raced through my mind because his mouth was never covered up, and he wasn't the one yelling. Sure enough, when Sereno played the tape for the killer, he had said, upon hearing the voice screaming for help, "That doesn't even sound like me." After this was mentioned again, I looked over at the jury, expecting some reaction. There wasn't much. Did this register with them? Didn't they just hear the killer admit that he didn't recognize his own voice calling for help? After recess, when a few follow-up questions by De La Rihanna, the prosecution rest. No more questions. Again, I couldn't believe it. The defense would spend hours questioning witnesses, tearing down their stories, and here, with the lead investigator on the stand, the prosecution rested after less than 2 hours. The prosecutors never gave the detective a chance to paint the true picture, never asked detectives, did you believe the killer's story? And I thought, oh no. At the very least, I thought De La Rianda should have asked Sereno about his recommendation on his report that Trayvon's killer be arrested and charged with manslaughter. A career police officer thinking there is enough evidence to charge a killer with manslaughter is something I believe that the prosecution should have drilled into the minds of each juror. Not only had the public demand an arrest of the killer, but the person who best knew the facts within the Sanford Police Department, Chris Sereno, had recommended charging him with manslaughter when he wrote his police report on the incident. I kept repeating in my mind, ask him about the recommendation. About his recommending the charge of manslaughter, but the question was never asked. Sereno also wrote in his report that the killer failed to identify himself in any way to Trayvon and acted in ways inconsistent with those of the person who had stated he was in fear of another subject and had missed the chances to defuse the circumstances surrounding their encounter. It seemed to me from Sereno's expression that he was also surprised that his testimony for the prosecution was so brief. He clearly had more to say, but there wasn't being asked of him. Of course, we knew the prosecutors don't like to be combative with police officers. Technically, they were on the same team, both paid by the city, county, and state. And Sereno had met and seemed cooperative with prosecutors during the investigation. So surely neither wanted to be openly confrontational with the other. In fact, remained that a lot was left on the table by the prosecution, but confrontation was at the core of the defense. This is a lot to goddamn read. I wish this chapter was over already. Why is his chapter so long? It seemed like, oh my god. When O'Mara rose to begin his cross examination, he listed Sereno's responsibilities as chief detective and then commented, it seemed, on the lack of questioning from the prosecution. You haven't testified to virtually any of that yet, though, have you? He asked. As to be methodology, what? As to the methodology of the case, Sereno said, no, I haven't. Basically, the only thing you testified so far is the statements from my client. Correct? Yes. O'Meridan had Sereno walk the jury through the steps he took that night. He spoke with the killer a few minutes after midnight, nearly 6 hours after the shooting. By then, he had also spoken with other witnesses like John Good and had reviewed all the information gathered up to the point, including the interview with the killer conducted by Officer Doris Singleton, initially working with a lot of information compared to what was originally available. O'Mara suggested the killer's versions of events told to both Singleton and Sereno appeared to line up. Did you notice any significant differences that caused you concern based upon your years of experience as an investigator? O'Mara asked. Not immediately, no, sir, Sereno said. Did he seem to be cagey in his answering to you? O'Mara said. Did he seem to be sidestepping your questions in any form or way to get around answering your questions? No, sir, Sereno said. Was he being straightforward, in my opinion? And he agreed with O'Mara's term that the killer didn't seem to have a flat effect about anything that had happened to him that night, which meant he was strangely calm. Sereno would suggest to the killer that he got some kind of psychological help to deal with it. Did it come across to you, though, that he was just uncaring? O'Mara asked, or was it truly your thought that he was reacting to the trauma? I didn't know him prior to this, Sereno said. That was one of the concerns, that may have been that he was uncaring or other things were going on. Would you expect that there were going to be some differences in his story? O'Mara said, absolutely. And why is that? Because we're not robots as people, he said. As a matter of fact, if someone were to come up to you and have the same exact story down, fact for fact, and word for word, sentence for sentence, each time you talk to them, what would you think about the person's honesty and veracity? O'Mara asks. Either they are being completely honest or completely false to the extreme, Sereno said. After some back and forth, the attorney asked, because that at this point you had fairly specific evidence that Mr. Zimmerman was acting in self-defense that night, correct? I had information that would have supported that. Wait, I thought, why would he suggest on his report that Zimmerman be charged with manslaughter if he thought it was a case of self-defense? Again, things just didn't add up. O'Mara moved on to the third interview Sereno did with the killer. Sereno talked about the other evidence he got and how he realized the only living person who knew how the incident began was the man on trial, of course. There were the 911 calls and statements from John Good, but only the killer knew how the confrontation started. I had nothing substance to basically toss it in to confront him with as far as the interview went, Sereno said, other than the suspicious lack of remembering the streets, how many streets he had in his neighborhood, and other oddities. So when, so then what you decide to take on, O'Mara said, is what's called a challenge interview, correct? At this point, I wasn't ready for one, but yes. You were also under quite a deal of pressure to get this case moved forward, correct? Sereno answered yes, and had to move even quicker than you would have otherwise. You have moved on this case because of some of the external pressures that we now know existed in this case as O'Mara. Yes, sir. And it was for that reason uh, that you may have moved a little bit quicker than you otherwise would have liked to interview Mrs. Emmon in a sort of aggressive content, correct? Sereno said yes. As a result, he had little to challenge Zimmerman with and described this third interview as mild. Sereno also noted that this case was particularly difficult because it was possible, at least from the detective's perspective, that in this particular case, I mean, he would have had considered a victim. Also, O'Mara then asked Sereno about the defendant's profiling of Trayvon and his reasons for questioning him about his extensions and thought process. Oh my God, this chapter is getting long as shit, and there's still so many other pages to read. I'm done. I'm gonna get back to you on the next one because this is a lot. I don't know why his chapters be so long, but I'll get back to y'all.